Yeah, yeah. Okay, good,
Pat, you want to start us off?
good, good.
You have the gavel?
Welcome, everyone, to City of Joliet special meeting here on Tuesday, the 25th at 5 p.m. Presiding over the meeting is our mayor, Robert Kocher.
Roll call. Mayor Whitaker.
Here.
Councilman Leonard.
Here.
Councilman Hutchinson.
Here.
Councilwoman Bevan. Here. Councilman Hogue. Councilman Morris. Councilwoman Palmer.
Here.
Councilwoman Reardon. Here. Councilman Turner.
Here?
There were no citizens to be heard on agenda items
in my mailbox.
signed
Oh,
up
okay.
previously.
Yeah.
Is there any in attendance
Yeah.
that would like to speak on agenda items? Hearing none.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We're really excited to be here tonight to provide an update and a lot of information on the Alternative Water Source Program. This is a second workshop that we'll be hosting in 2020 as part of the evaluation we're completing. So I just wanted to do some quick introductions. My name's Allison Swisher. I'm the Director of Public Utilities for the City of Joliet. Also here today, we have Mr. Joe Johnson, who's the project manager for Stantec, Teresa O'Grady, who's a project manager on the program for Crawford, Murphy, and Tilly. And also in attendance, we have Barbara Adams with Donahue and Rose, who's the special legal counsel on the project, and then Mr. Pete Wallers with EEI, who has been coordinating the regional outreach component of the project. So this is tonight's agenda. There is a lot to cover. So we are going to try and present this information as concisely as possible. This is all information that was presented to you in the memos that we submitted to the council on Friday. In the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat the information related to the alternative water source study that was completed in 2019 that led to the selection of the Lake Michigan water source. However, if there's anyone who's watching today or who's in attendance who would like more information, we have a wealth of information on the website, which is rethinkwaterjoliet.org. So there's a lot of information on there regarding the phase 1 and 2 studies that were completed for the Alternative Water Source Program. So on tonight's agenda, I'm just going to give a brief update on the project status and then give a presentation on the governance strategy for a regional water option. After each of the presentations, we're going to pause so that we can get the council input, answer any questions you might have, and then obtain your concurrence on the recommendations. Following the regional governance strategy, then I'll turn it over to Joe Johnson, who's going to talk about water treatment process evaluation. And then following that presentation, Teresa O'Grady will do a presentation on the level 1 transmission main routing evaluation. Okay, so the goals for today, again, we want to update the City Council on the progress and the schedule for the 2020 evaluation. And then we want to obtain the concurrence from the City Council on these 3 major topics. And these topics are all integral to moving forward with completing the 2020 evaluation of comparing the 2 Lake Michigan alternatives, which is purchasing water from the City of Chicago or the new Indiana intake alternative. This isn't going to be the last time that we discuss these items, but we're at a critical point that we wanted to present the information to you so that when we move forward with preparing the prospectus documents for those 2 alternatives, that it's not going to be the first time that you see this information. All right, well, I'll skip over to the next agenda item, which is the Alternative Water Source Program update. So this slide isn't new. This is the program schedule. Again, the ultimate goal here is that we need to have the new water source online by 2030. That's when the city's current water source will not be able to meet maximum day demands. Some other key dates identified on here are November 2020. This is when we'll be presenting those prospectus documents that were discussed during the first workshop for each of the alternatives. Then in December, we'll be hosting a public forum, very similar to what we did last year, so that we can obtain input from the public. And then from there, then we'll present the options for the City Council for selection of the alternative water source. In 2021, we'll move into preliminary design, and then at that point, the regional water system will be seeking final decisions from those potential partners by the end of 2021, so that we can then move into 2022 with the final design and sizing of the new infrastructure. Construction then would begin in 2025 and be for a 5-year period. So just want to briefly update everyone on what has been completed since the last City Council workshop. We've been having ongoing meetings with potential water supply and water access providers, namely Chicago and Hammond, that occurred in July. We hosted the second stakeholder meeting that was done virtually. We had about 66 people in attendance, which was a good turnout for that meeting. Then also there's been a lot of technical work that's been ongoing related to the transmission main routing, the raw water quality evaluation, and then also corrosion control. In August, we've continued with those meetings with the water supply and water access providers. You'll note that we have added a number of additional entities to those discussions, including Gary, Indiana, Whiting, Indiana, and the Southland Water Agency. And with those additions, we're looking to optimize and present the best option to the council for the new Indiana intake alternative. Internally, we hosted within the project team transmission main workshops and regional governance workshop, which was an opportunity for the project team to come together and really brainstorm what the best recommendations were going to be that you'll be presented with today. Mr. Joe Johnston attended the August 18th Finance Committee meeting, at which he presented on project affordability and the information that we've been working on with the finance team for the project. And he's in the process of developing a one-page summary of that affordability information, which we'll be distributing to the council, along with the PowerPoint slides that were presented at that meeting. Okay. And then for next month, we also have a lot of work going on. The meetings we're having with the water supply and water access providers, we're going to increase those to weekly meetings. And the goal is that we're working to memorandum of understandings with each of those entities that would be executed by their respective councils by the time that the City Council makes a final decision on the alternative water source. We want to provide you with the confidence that whichever alternative is selected, that there is a path forward to signing a formal agreement with one of these entities, and that those major terms and conditions will not be changing. We'll be hosting stakeholder meeting number 3. That date is to be determined at this point. We've also been working this summer on the Lake Michigan allocation application, and we anticipate that we'll be submitting that in the middle of September to the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. And from there, then we'll move forward with securing the allocation for the Lake Michigan water. We also have ongoing technical engineering work associated with the transmission main routing study that Teresa will discuss later on this evening. So, and also every month we have ongoing governmental outreach. The advocacy team is scheduling meetings with local and state, federal legislators. So definitely getting the word out about the program. I know Mayor Odekirk has been participating in a number of meetings as well with state and federal legislators to gain support for the program. We've been doing a lot of public outreach with our monthly newsletter, billboards, and then e-blasts, and then also having internally financial team meetings to develop the funding strategy for the program that'll be presented to the Finance Committee in October. So again, we always want to encourage everyone to get involved. There's a number of ways that Joliet residents and other stakeholders can keep informed of the project. We have a mailing list. You can go to the website and sign up to be on this, and then each month the monthly newsletter will be delivered into your inbox. We have a lot of educational topics on the website, and then we have the public meetings that I previously mentioned. So I'll just pause for a moment if there's any general questions about the program schedule, or any of the work that's being done. Okay. Then I'll move into the next agenda item, which is a discussion and recommendation for the governance strategy for a regional water option. So we know that in 2018, the Illinois State Water Survey completed updated groundwater modeling that showed that the city of Joliet would not be able to meet its maximum day water demands by 2030. However, this problem is not unique to Joliet. So within our region, a third of the demands on the deep aquifer come from the city of Joliet. About a third is from the surrounding communities, and then a third is industry. So it's definitely a problem that is not unique to Joliet. As this graphic shows, Joliet switching off of the aquifer in 2030 does not solve the problem for the region. The aquifer is not sustainable. The State Water Survey, through their updated modeling, has been very clear about this. The orange color there shows you areas in 2050 where there would be a risk to declining well performance. And so through the efforts of the Southwest Water Planning Group, which Joliet is a member of, other communities and industries are working with the State Water Survey to obtain the information that they need to better understand their time frame for finding an alternative water source. So a lot of the communities are going through the same process that we went through in 2018 and 2019 to evaluate alternative water sources. So from day one of the alternative water source study, Joliet has evaluated the alternatives not only as a solution for Joliet, but also as a region. And so when planning for a regional water system, it's important that we understand who the potential regional partners are. And there's many different variables at play. There's different types of partners. We're unique in this area in that there's a large industrial presence. So we have not only municipalities, but also industries that could be potential partners. There's different existing water sources and needs. So, Joliet relies on the deep aquifer, but then communities like Lockport and Crest Hill have shallow aquifer water systems. And then there's other communities like Plainfield and New Lenox that currently obtain water from Lake Michigan. So that's another variable that comes into play when looking at who are the potential partners. And then, of course, proximity to Joliet. And constructing this infrastructure, you can see the communities that we've been considering regional partners are surrounding the Joliet area in the western Will and then Kendall and Grundy counties. So this exhibit shows the 18 communities and 3 industries that we've identified as potential partners. And these are the ones that we've been having one-on-one meetings with this summer to gauge their interest in participating in a regional water system. So it's also equally important to understand which communities are not being considered as regional partners and why. So there's, for the new Indiana intake alternative, there was initially a thought that communities along the transmission main routes may want to participate. And so this is what this exhibit shows. That black line in the middle is, and some of the other lines are the transmission main routes. And then we did a boundary around there to capture, communities that would be, I think, within a mile of that transmission main. And so what we found is that there's really 2 reasons why we're not recommending further discussions with these communities for being potential partners. One is that the majority of these communities already have existing long-term contracts to purchase Lake Michigan water, either from Chicago or from Hammond, Indiana. And so, for example, Mokina has a water purchase agreement to purchase water from Tinley Park via Oak Lawn through 2054. So, a lot of these communities are ones that already have Lake Michigan water and already have contracts in place. So there's, we don't anticipate the interest there from these communities to, join a regional water system in the 2030 timeframe. There's also technical reasons for why we would locate the water treatment plant closer to Joliet. So if we locate the water treatment plant closer to Joliet, then this pipeline that would be running through these communities would be raw water and not finished water. So there would be the opportunity to sell finished water to these communities. And And Joe Johnson will explain more in his presentation some of the benefits of having that water treatment plant located closer to Joliet versus having it closer to the Indiana state line. So in 2020, the project team was tasked with further development of a regional water system, and this consisted of two components. The first one being regional outreach, and the second one being regional governance evaluation. And I'll talk about each of those in more detail. So for the regional outreach, Pete Wallers and I had one-on-one meetings with those communities and industries that I had identified on that slide with the potential regional partners. The meetings were very informative. Communities were all very appreciative of the leadership role that Joliet has taken on this issue. They acknowledged that the process has been open and transparent, and were, again, appreciative of Joliet's efforts to be collaborative on this issue. And I think the other takeaway that I had from this is that these communities are taking this seriously, and again, as I mentioned before, doing their own studies, evaluating their alternatives, and definitely Joliet as an alternative water source is one of those alternatives that they're considering. So the major points of the meetings was to receive input on two major topics. The first one is the preference related to the source. I know when we met with the council, previously, that was one of the considerations you wanted to take into account when evaluating the Chicago option versus the new Indiana intake option. So we've been asking communities if they had a preference for Chicago versus Indiana. We've also been asking them if they have a preference related to governance. So we had presented them with two options, one a commission approach, and the other approach was a customer approach. So we, as of August 17th, the communities we had met with by that date, 13 have expressed interest in continuing the discussions of a regional water supply. At this point, it's really too premature to say with any certainty which ones or how many would definitely be participating. There's still so many variables that they have to consider that we haven't been able to provide them yet with, such as, what is the source going to be? What is the cost going to be? And I think as we provide those details next year, then we can move forward with more clarity on who those partners are going to be. For today's discussion, it's important to note that of the 13 communities that are interested in continuing discussions, 11 have preferred that a commission be formed. So the remaining 2 did not have a preference. So the second component of the regional evaluation was a governance evaluation. This was prepared by Barbara Adams with Donahue and Rose. And she investigated the water system governance structures that are currently available by state statutes and evaluated the advantages and disadvantages. And this memo that she prepared was an attachment to the information that I sent to the council on Friday. So this slide shows the 5 major entities that could exist as options for, for governance structures. And again, these are discussed and evaluated in more detail in that memo that Barb prepared. So each of the entities differs slightly on how these key features that are on the slide are addressed. And the memo goes into greater detail on those differences for each of the entity types. But as you can see, there's a lot of, a lot of different nuances that would differentiate those different entities. So based on the outreach conducted and the governance evaluation, staff and the project team are recommending a water commission be formed, with modifications that I'll discuss on the next slide. And a water commission provides many benefits to Joliet and potential regional partners. There would be lower water rates due to cost sharing and economies of scale. As presented in the phase 2 study, we saw that estimated this would be approximately $10 a month. And we are continuing to refine and update what that cost saving potential could be. And that was based on a 60 MGD system. A commission would also distribute the risk amongst more entities. And it also would, believe it would garner support of state and federal agencies such as IEPA and US EPA, as well as position the region well for state and federal legislators. I had a conversation with Congressman Foster a couple of weeks ago, and he was really excited about the idea of a regional water system and indicated that's something that he would fully support, Joliet and the other potential member communities in, moving forward with any assistance that he might be able to offer. And then lastly, an important benefit of a water commission is its ability to obtain access for construction and right-of-ways outside of Joliet. So when Teresa goes through the transmission main evaluation, you'll see that there are numerous entities that we will have to work with outside of Joliet and obtain permits from. And with the commission format, we can access those rights-of-ways, so we won't have those roadblocks if Joliet was going on this alone. If Joliet does not have that right to use the rights-of-ways of other communities without their permission. So in our discussions with the potential regional partners, it was emphasized that the commission had to be fair and equitable for all members. And there was recognition from those communities that we talked to that those making a larger financial contribution, such as Joliet, should have control that was proportional to their financial contribution. I know that's been an issue with the other commission and the current state statute for water commissions that requires one member, one vote. So in our conversations, we have been advocating for a proportional representation. So therefore, we are proposing these following modifications to the Water Commission statutes. The commission board makeup, we would identify that would be representatives from each of the member communities. However, the number of representatives would be based on the maximum day demand. And then voting would be proportional, again, based on the members' maximum day demand in relation to the total system capacity. And it's important that that proportional voting we've identified would be utilized for certain decisions that have greater impact. So for routine day-to-day things such as approving invoices or approving meeting minutes, that proportional vote isn't as critical. However, as you would move into bigger decisions related to the ones identified here, setting rates, borrowing funds, and sale of assets, that's where each member would vote proportionally. And one way to think about it is that it's kind of similar to how a corporation is run, where for certain major decisions, each member of that board, votes their shares. And so that is what we're proposing for proportional voting rights. And then as we've talked with other members or potential members, there was concern about certain issues having a supermajority requirement. So that's another recommendation that we would explore further is what items would trigger that supermajority requirement.
Mayor, I have a question.
Would that be something that would be created for either direction?
Yes, that's correct. So this recommendation is for both the Chicago purchase water option as well as the Indiana intake option.
What do you see as the time frame for us to, how long will it take to create this commission? How long would have it, what we have in place to start working out the details?
Yeah, I have next steps coming up, so I'll answer that question, and I'll probably defer to Barb to speak on kind of the more precise schedule as it relates to needing to have it in place for bonding and other financing type requirements. So,
Mayor,
Nelson.
I'm sorry. Question, what is the criteria for choosing the people for the commission? Would that be up to each city individually as far as their councils would go, or how would that work?
Yeah, that's an item that we would discuss moving forward if, with the council's concurrence on this kind of major philosophy. There are, I'll defer to Barb on what the current statute states, but I know for, some it's, appointed by the mayor with the concurrence of the council. I think others designates a specific person in each community, such as the city manager, but Barb, do you want to add any information on that?
Yes, as to water commissions, the standard water commission that Allison is talking about in this recommendation, each member municipality appoints a member, although we may be proposing a different head count per municipality, but the statute does provide that it's an appointment by the mayor with the advice and consent of the council or village board.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor,
Yes.
just a clarification. I'm deciding on the commission members voting rights, I guess you would say, you know, which, based on maximum day demand. It says maximum day demand for each community as a portion of the total capacity of the system. Well, up front, we won't be using total capacity, you know. Shouldn't it be maximum day demand of each community balanced against total maximum day demand?
Right, so when, at the end of 21, every community is gonna have to decide how much they're gonna buy into the system, because we have to size it for that ultimate build out. And that's gonna be a very difficult decision, you know, Joliet's gonna have to make. You know, in Will County, you know, we're still growing. So trying to identify what that final sizing is for the infrastructure is going to be a challenge. But that is how we would assess people's financial responsibility, is based on that amount, because the sizing of the infrastructure will be based on maximum day demand. So that we felt was the most equitable way to assess the financial.
No, and I understand it. I guess what I'm saying is if we have 60 million maximum capacity and we're using 27 million because we've only got 3 members up front, you know, a small community's percentage will be 0.1% versus that 60 million. Versus they might be at 4 or 5% versus the 21 million that we're actually using. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I mean, definitely those, you know, details. This is, you know, kind of the major concept that we're looking to present and recommend tonight. And then a lot of those details are kind of in this next step slide that we have to decide. So definitely the point is well taken, and it's not, I mean, a lot of these details are, you know, going to be complex and involve a lot of, you know, thought behind them to make sure that it's fair and equitable and in the best interest of all the members. So as this, you know, as the next steps go, there's many details that have to be worked out. Some of them that we've identified now are, you know, delineation of ownership of the infrastructure. You know, at what point does the infrastructure ownership transition from the commission to the member community? Which are the decisions that, you know, require proportional and supermajority voting? You know, we listed a few key ones, but we know that, like, for example, in the DuPage Water Commission contract, it's very specific, you know, which items require which level of voting. There has to be a mechanism for managing the system design and construction so that it's available by 2030. It's very important that you know, Joliet protects our need to have that in place. And so we envision that that would be a component that would be written into the agreement then forming the commission, that there would be a mechanism in place that this is going to be done by 2030. Operation of the Water Commission infrastructure, would be commission be hiring staff? Would it be utilizing the existing operational capacity of a member? Rates are, you know, very important. You know, when talking to potential regional partners, you know, that is always the number one question, is how much is this going to cost? And so we have to develop that rate structure. There's the startup, financing, capital costs, and member contributions. And as we were kind of mentioning earlier, we envision that this would be based on, you know, the maximum day demand of each member community. That would be their contribution based on the cost of that proportion of the infrastructure. And then lastly, you know, the availability of future system capacity. We have had communities ask us if there was the opportunity for them to buy into the capital costs to kind of set aside capacity for them for the future. And so that's an option that we'll be exploring, again, to try and encourage as much participation as possible. So really with the City Council's support tonight, we would move forward then with, you know, this major philosophy of forming a water commission with the proportional voting modification. And so then the timeline, which I think Councilman Reardon, this kind of gets to your question. So for the next, for the end of this year, we're going to continue the regional outreach and discussions regarding this evaluation, kind of really take it to the next step. I know a lot of the communities have been waiting for this meeting to understand, you know, if the council would support this arrangement. Then after the council decision at the end of this year, we would move forward really with those details of developing the rate structure and kind of the governance details for the Water Commission. As I mentioned, this modification would require a legislative process to modify the state statute for the standard Water Commission. So we would envision then we'd kind of start that process the second half of next year. And then we'd really move into having the resolutions approved to form the Water Commission. So the process for that would be, we would come to the council with a resolution to form a commission. Each of the other members would do the same thing. After that, the commission would be formed. And then the city council would approve a water purchase agreement with the Water Commission to purchase the water. And then from there, the city council would set the rates for the Joliet utility customers. So this is really our best opportunity to solve a regional problem collaboratively. I do think there's a lot of interest from the regional communities to participate in this. And, I think what we've presented tonight, this recommendation, is in the best interest of the city of Joliet as well as all of the region as a whole. And so that concludes the presentation. And for each of the presentations, we're going to kind of move into a group discussion phase. And so the first part of it, we'll just open up to the full council if there's any questions regarding what was presented. And I think, Councilman Reardon, you'd wanted more information about the actual timeline for how long it would take to form the commission. So I'll turn it over to Barb Adams again.
Okay, I have the green light. One of the things to think about is that because we don't yet have the legislation in place that would create the commission that we would like, that the group decides that it would like, there may be a period where we're kind of working hand in hand with communities, but not under an official structure. And then there will be a point where we need to go to Springfield, get the legislature on board, and get a bill passed. And then I think probably that is the point at which you would want to form the commission. It might be possible to form it earlier and then amend the law to sort of retrofit, and some commissions have done that. But in this case, it may be that you will want, given that there's enough other questions up in the air, it's probably sensible to get some of those resolved, go to Springfield, and then have that conversation, then come back to each member for adoption of a resolution or ordinance to join the commission.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we're starting tonight, you're going to Springfield tonight.
No, exactly. Like we said on the schedule, we're thinking that we would try and, kind of introduce the idea next fall and then, look for spring legislation. So are there any other questions regarding the governance evaluation?
Yeah, the DuPage Water Commission exists under some type of state legislation already. How would we not come in under that? Does each commission have to have its own legislation?
No, but I'll again defer to Barb, but basically when the DuPage Water Commission was formed, they wanted to make modifications to the standard Water Commission structure. So they are kind of doing what we're talking about tonight. They went to Springfield and had legislation passed specific for what they were desiring as far as the board makeup. So Barb, I'll defer to you.
Right. That's right. The DuPage Water Commission formed itself under sort of the standard Water Commission statute, but then went to Springfield, and there was a whole conversation about county representation, municipal representation. There were some mechanisms for financing that were developed in terms of options for bonding, general obligation bond, revenue bond, and other things. So DuPage Water Commission operates really under both statutes, with the 1985 Act being the more the one that governs if there's a conflict between the two.
And then the other one is the one that was tweaked, so to speak? 1985 was the original
That
Water
was
Commission?
the act that was passed for the DuPage
For
Water
debate.
Commission.
So would this Water Commission have the benefit of both the original Water Commission statute as well as the 1985 one?
Right now, you would not meet the qualifications for fitting under the 1985 statute because there's a population of the commission versus the population of the county comparison that would have to be done, and we're not there, but we're keeping an eye on that because we don't know if we would want to be under that 1985 statute. I think the sense of the discussions that have been had so far is that folks would be looking for a different kind of style of governance than the DuPage Commission has.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay. Then, similar to the last workshop, we wanted to just pause and get the, comments from specific council members, just so that we can, proceed with this recommendation to the next level. So, Councilman Dickinson, I'll just start with you.
I don't really have anything right now. I think everything's moving in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Hung?
I understand the advantage of going by the way of commission versus by way of Joliet on its own. So, I certainly think that's the most effective way to do it. Did I understand right? There are some communities that basically want to buy a reservation, so to speak.
Yes, that's correct.
So there's some that are saying we're not ready to make the switch, but we kind of want to get on the ground level. So we'll help
Finance the
finance
capital
it.
improvements.
We may not come back to you for 15 years.
That's correct.
But that gives us a seat at the table.
Yeah, that's a detail that we would have to work out in the next step of this, is trying to understand what, involvement those communities have, and, likely they wouldn't, and I know, Pete, you and I have discussed this a lot about, the thoughts as far as, how that might be structured.
It is a detail that hasn't been sorted out yet, and unlikely that I think those communities would have active participation at the outset, but as they came in, then you have a seat at the table.
So essentially what we could look at is, and I like the fact that they're making that commitment. It could be a considerable commitment depending on the size. Maybe we should consider, and we can get to those details later, like a non-voting membership to the commission until they start drawing water, kind of like the Puerto Rico of the commission, They have a representative, but they don't get to vote until they start drawing water and are affected by the decisions.
It will definitely start working through those details with those communities. So, Mayor Ordeker?
Yeah, obviously, I'm happy the city's taking a leadership role in this, and I do think the regional approach is the right way. So with that in mind, and if the feedback we're getting from the community's interest is that they want some type of commission, I think it'd be reasonable that we head that way.
Thank you. Councilman Pullman?
Well, you and I spoke the other day, and I said, I think this is the way to go. It doesn't put all the burden on Joliet, yet allows us to help other communities, to get the Chicago water. So I think with all involved in a lot of different opinions and monies and everybody doing a good thing for their community, this is the way to go, to just share in the water.
Thank you. Councilman Turk?
Yeah, I agree that the commission form is probably the best way to approach it. You mentioned earlier about the finance committee getting a brief presentation, half-hour presentation, but it's still brief, about cost, and so eventually this will work by December or whatever, to work into the analysis of it.
Yeah, I'll have Joe Johnson speak to that as far as what we'll be presenting as far as costs. I think we're still proceeding with the 30 and the 60 MGD alternatives, though we understand that 60 MGD, which we're calling the regional option, will have to be fine-tuned then moving forward after 2020, so that we have what that precise cost would be.
Correct, Allison. The primary objective, as you can imagine, is to figure out the cost of both options, both a Joliet only and a regional option. The benefit of the regional option is, as you increase capacity of the system, the cost doesn't go up proportionally. There are economies of scale. And so if we can then divide that cost by a larger number of users, a larger volume of water, there is a decrease in the unit price of water to everyone. And so we had run some preliminary numbers last year to kind of show the relative impact of that. And as Allison said, as we work through this year, refining the numbers and kind of refining the financing plan, we'll be able to come back to you with a better understanding of what that benefit is to everybody in the region.
And I know that the presentation you gave was very good and very sensitive about cost and how how it would be administered and put out. So you'll be giving that to the full council at some point in time, correct?
Absolutely. I think the presentation you're referring to is really two parts of this. I don't want to sidetrack us
Sure.
tonight, but certainly
No,
there
no.
is the cost of water that the commission would sell to all the member communities. And then within each community, the city council in Joliet still has the final say on the rates you actually then charge to your customers that build in your other costs. And affordability is a key part of that, understanding at the end of the day, how will these costs affect your ratepayers and who are the ratepayers that may be impacted more severely? And are there things that we can do to structure that financing plan to mitigate those impacts?
Great. But yeah, I totally agree with the commission form.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and we'll be sharing the presentation that Councilman Turk was referring to regarding the affordability information with the full council. So, Councilman Ledry.
Councilman, you said there was 13 communities at this time interested, and 11 are voting for the commission. The other two didn't have enough information, or they were not against commission, or?
They weren't against it, they just said they didn't have a preference. I think some of the smaller communities recognize that, perhaps, they feel more comfortable in a customer approach because they don't want to take on some of the financial risks of, getting in and funding the overall system. So, definitely, again, as we move forward with the details, we're not saying that we won't offer that customer option to communities. If a community would prefer to be a customer of one of the member communities, that's one of the details that we'll work out how that would be structured.
Thank you.
Councilman Morris?
Yeah, I think the regional approach sounds like it's good for the region. So I was looking for that, once we get more information on the council.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Reardon?
I agree with everyone. I think that the regional approach with the commission is the sensible way to go.
Okay, thank you. And Councilwoman Gavin?
I certainly agree with the regional commissioner's approach, and I think that Joliet will be able to be protected in this piece as well. So I certainly agree the regional commission approach.
Okay, thank you. And so, next steps, Pete and I will be regrouping again now with those 13 communities, and there's a few more I think that we've met with since that slide was prepared, to kind of take those next steps of moving forward with preparing the details associated with the commission. So we'll be finding an opportunity to, over the next year as this continues to be developed, to, provide input or receive input from the council on some of those more detailed components of the structure. Okay, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Johnson, who's going to move to the next agenda item, which is the water treatment process evaluation.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, council. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you again here tonight. I'm going to try to give you kind of a brief overview of water treatment and its role in this project. And I guess starting off, why are we talking about this? Why is this important in the context of these bigger discussions you're having about a regional solution or a commission? And the key factor here is that the two alternatives that we're asking you to consider this year, only one of them requires you to construct a water treatment plant. Under the option with Chicago, we would buy treated water from the city of Chicago, and Chicago would have the burden, as they do for many of their customers right now, for treating that water to potable water standards and distributing it. If we go the new Indiana intake alternative, then there would have to be a new water treatment plant built. And so it's a differentiator between the options, and we felt it was important to talk a little bit about that so you understand how that fits into the evaluation. The other factors that are important is that the treatment plant in the Indiana intake alternative is something that gives you some flexibility. If you buy treated water from Chicago, the quality of the water you receive is generally set. And Chicago does an outstanding job of treating Lake Michigan water. They've been doing it for years. They have a significant staff that does that. But with the Indiana intake alternative, you have the ability to look and say, what are our options for how we treat that water, and what's the quality of water we bring to Joliet? And that, in turn, can affect your capital and operating costs, and we want to make sure that's adequately represented in the overall comparison of the alternatives. So What are some of the considerations when we look at a process for treating water? Well, clearly we want to be able to remove and inactivate pathogens. We want to make sure that the water is high quality, and certainly it's going to be good for people and be healthy for them. We want to minimize what's called disinfection byproducts. In the process of killing bacteria by disinfecting water, you can also create other byproducts of that process that can be harmful over a long term. So we want to make sure we manage and minimize the formation of those. We want to make sure we minimize any bacterial regrowth, that once the water is treated, we want to make sure it stays clean all the way to the tap of your customer. We want to make sure the taste and odor of the water are acceptable. And this is something that's not really a regulatory standard. The EPA doesn't tell us how your water has to taste, but I guarantee you your customers will tell you whether they like the taste of your water or not. So the process needs to give you the ability to fine tune, if you will, and make sure that that taste and odor are acceptable to your customers. And then lastly, we need to look into our crystal ball a little bit, and over time, as our ability to sample and test water becomes more sophisticated, we're finding that basically anything that we've produced as a society can find its way into our water. And so there are what we call emerging contaminants that we have to worry about. We want to make sure that we have the ability to treat those and protect our customers from any impacts those might have on the water. So for the purpose of this project, we've set treated water quality goals. And I'm not going to go through this table. We've identified, these are some of the common parameters that you might see looked at in terms of water quality. There's a full table in the memo. But we've established these, and we've identified certain goals where we believe that Joliet system should be able to not only meet the regulatory standards, but exceed them. And so all the items listed on this table are areas where we would propose to develop a treatment process that not only meets the standard, but exceeds it. And then at the same time, as I mentioned, we want to make sure we have the ability to address emerging contaminants. Some of the things that you may have seen in the media in recent years, there's something called PFAS, which are these per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're basically industrial chemicals, and one of the common uses was in nonstick cookware. Those are really not a big issue in Lake Michigan. They're not the primary areas where those are issues are areas close to plants that manufactured those chemicals and places where it's gotten into the groundwater. But we want to make sure we're able to deal with that. Microplastics, obviously, as plastics are discarded, they degrade, and we're finding that very small particles of plastic can find their way into water sources. We need to be able to deal with that. Chemicals like hexavalent chromium, which is a byproduct of some industrial processes, particularly when we're looking at a source at the southern end of Lake Michigan where there are industries present. We want to make sure we have a system that's robust and can deal with those. Algal toxins, there was a lot of press several years ago about Toledo and the western end of Lake Erie and the fact that they had some serious problems with algae and the toxins that were produced there. Again, this has not been an issue in our part of Lake Michigan, but we want to be prepared for it. And then lastly, all the pharmaceuticals and personal care products that we use go into our wastewater, and in some cases can find their way into our water sources. We want to make sure that we can deal with those. These emerging contaminants in many cases are not currently regulated. So we need to look at a process that has the flexibility to adapt over time and respond to new things that we might identify that need to be removed from our water source. For the purpose of this
Question?
I'm sorry, yes.
In regard to the pharmaceuticals, I know hospitals discard their extra drugs in a syringe if they don't use it into the water system. Now, do they have a treatment plant within their hospitals to help with that, or it just goes back into our water system?
No, in general, and I don't know this specifically, I imagine that most communities, most areas have unused prescription drop-off programs. So there's a very aggressive program to encourage people not to flush medications.
No, I'm talking about the hospital themselves.
I don't believe that they would discard them in the normal wastewater process. I believe that they would have a different process for discarding those. I can look into that a little bit more, but I would be very surprised if it was a standard practice to just discard those into a traditional wastewater system.
Well, I know different.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's
why I'm asking the question.
Okay, well, that would certainly be a source of concern, and that's why some of these emerging contaminants, we need to be aware of those, because we don't want those things then passing through the treatment system into our drinking water.
That's why I asked the question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So for the purpose of this analysis, we identified 3 treatment process alternatives. There's a large combination of options that we could have looked at. But the 3 processes that we've evaluated for Joliet, we started with something that's what we call conventional treatment. And it's conventional because it's widely used in this area. Communities like Chicago, Evanston, Hammond, many other communities around the Great Lakes use this process where you have a settling process. You add chemicals to the water to get particles to stick together and settle out. You filter the water through a filter that has both sand and anthracite in it to filter the particles out. And then you disinfect the water to kill any bacteria before it goes out into the system. Widely used, it's basically the same process that's been in use since we started centralized water treatment in this country. Obviously, a lot of advancements in our understanding of it. It's a very effective process, but it has some limitations in terms of its ability to meet address these emerging contaminants and meet future water quality standards. The second option we looked at is more of an advanced process that relies on what's called membrane filtration. In a membrane filtration process, the water is brought in and it's pushed through membranes, and these are typically hollow tubes. So you can imagine the water going through a tube. It's forced through that tube at relatively high pressure, and only certain particles can get through that membrane. So some of the particles are captured and they're flushed out, they're removed from the water supply. So the water that comes out has had these particulates removed from it. You can also refer to this as microfiltration. So that second process that we look at would involve that microfiltration preceded by a process that would help us take out some of the larger solids to make sure that we don't overload that membrane system. Highland Park, Illinois, East Chicago, Indiana both have membrane systems in operation right now. And then the third option, which we've just called advanced water treatment, really builds on the conventional system. It still uses sedimentation, clarification, and filtration, but we've added 2 key components. One, which is an ozone step. Ozone is a very aggressive oxidizer. It breaks chemicals, compounds down, inactivates bacteria and certain viruses. And then granular activated carbon filtration. So instead of just filtering the water through a system where we're removing particles, granular activated carbon actually absorbs certain compounds onto that carbon and removes them from the water source. So it's a more robust form of filtration. And so that's similar to the process that's in use up in Lake Bluff at the Central Lake County Jawa system that was built about 25 years ago. So these are all systems that are proven. They work in Illinois. They're meeting standards, providing high quality water throughout the community, but there are some differences. We've gone through an evaluation of these, and the first question I think that's going to come up is, well, what's the difference in cost? And so we've looked at both the construction cost and the annual operating costs of these alternatives. These costs are all for a 30 MGD option. Obviously, if it's scaled up to 60, the costs go up. They wouldn't double, but they would go up a certain proportion. And as you can see, the construction costs for the advanced process and the membrane filtration process are about 10 to 15% higher than the conventional process. So they're higher, but not by an order of magnitude. Similarly, with the operating and maintenance costs, those costs are higher. The membrane system has the highest operating cost because of the additional energy required to push the water through the membranes. And when you roll all that up into what we call a net present value over 30 years, you end up with a scenario where the alternative one, the conventional, is about $160 million. The other 2 are in that $180 to $190 million range. So again, the advanced processes are more expensive, but not by an order of magnitude. So the other thing we want to do is cost is not the only factor. We do need to look at these systems and see what are some of the non-cost considerations that affect what might be the appropriate solution for Joliet. And there are a number of items on here. We've kind of ranked them where a plus is good, the O is neutral, a negative is bad. But rather than trying to go through and count all these up, I think the key takeaway from this slide is that first row. Finished water quality is really the primary objective here that we're talking about. Given that the costs don't vary by an order of magnitude, it's our opinion that really we need to make sure that we're providing and we're basing our analysis on a system that would give Joliet the ability to produce high quality water now and well into the future. Have a robust system that can address changes that may come up and be prepared. If we're going to select an alternative where Joliet can build its own water treatment plant, we want to make sure that you have a plant that you want to live with for the long term, and that you're not going to be surprised by the need to upgrade that plant at some point in the future. So with that, the recommendation of the technical team and working with city staff is that we use the advanced water treatment approach as the basis for our analysis this year in terms of figuring out how does water treatment cost fit into the overall Indiana intake alternative. The key considerations there, certainly it meets all the treated water quality goals. It provides the best option for Joliet to be able to meet emerging contaminants and adapt to changing conditions down the road. And it provides a highly effective method for managing taste and odor control. I'm sure that there are people in Joliet who love the taste of Joliet water right now and who may not like the taste of Lake Michigan water. So we want to have that ability to have that taste and odor control component in the process so that as we work through the design and piloting and designing a system, we can tune that a little bit and make sure that we're trying to provide a taste, a water that's aesthetically pleasing as well as extremely high quality. So with that, the next steps on the water treatment front, this year we're moving forward with conceptual design of the advanced water treatment plant so that we can build those costs, updated costs into our overall analysis. As Allison pointed out, the end of this year, the council will be making a decision on the alternative. So we want to make sure we have the best data in that comparison so you understand that trade-off between treating your own water and buying treated water. If the Indiana intake alternative were to be selected, then moving into next year, we would start with preliminary design of the new water treatment plant. Pilot testing is something that's typically done with advanced processes to basically test out the system on a smaller scale and work out the kinks, make sure we know, okay, what's the right way to operate this? How do we fine tune it to provide the system that we want? And then we move into detailed design and permitting of the water treatment plant 2022 to 24, followed by construction. One other point that I do want to make with regards to the water treatment plant relates to something Allison mentioned earlier. With a system where we're drawing water from Lake Michigan in Indiana, there is a long distance between the source and Joliet. Quite honestly, that water treatment plant could be constructed anywhere along that pipeline. It could be close to the lake, it could be halfway here, it could be in Joliet. We have started to look at the considerations around what makes the most sense. And there are some benefits if you think about the fact that we spend a lot of money to treat this water to a high degree of quality in Indiana. Then we have to make sure that we're taking measures to maintain that quality over the course of the 24 hours or so it may take to work its way to Joliet and get out to the customers here. Then you also have a situation where Joliet or the commission has a facility 45 miles away that it's responsible for operating. Our recommendation right now is that we proceed with the layout of the system with a plant that would be located closer to Joliet. So we would pump raw water from Lake Michigan, from Indiana into Illinois. Have to make sure that we make provisions for dealing with some of the sediment that may be in that water and maintain that pipeline and protecting the system from the impacts of that. But bringing that raw water to a treatment plant that would either be located on the east side of Joliet or, depending on how the commission develops, if there are some customers east of Joliet but still in this region, then maybe the treatment plant would get moved a little bit further east so that we could provide treated water to them as well. So that siting analysis is going on, but our general approach right now is that the plant would be located closer to Joliet as opposed to closer to Indiana. So with that, I'll invite Allison back up to kind of lead our group discussion on this item.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Similar to the last presentation, just first open it up to the council for any questions you might have on the information that Mr. Johnson presented.
What was the CCAJAWA?
That's the Central Lake County JAWA, and Joe, if you could identify who those members are, that would be helpful.
Central Lake County JAWA is a regional water agency that operates in Lake County. The plant is located in Lake Bluff. It includes Lake Forest, Libertyville, Mundelein. There's I think maybe about 10 or 12 communities that are members of that organization.
So it's a commission, and they use the advanced approach?
They do. They have a very sophisticated water treatment plant, and you know, that's something that I'm sure they would be happy to under the appropriate circumstances, and have a visit up there if people wanted to go up and see that system and how it operates.
So, Joe, if the recommendation stays that the treatment plant would be east of here, and we sell, some of our communities that we're gonna sell water to are east of there, would this be refined water that we're repiping back to them, or would we be selling them raw water that have their own plants?
The concept right now is that we would try to locate the plant at the eastern edge of our service area.
Okay.
So, for example, if there's a community to the east of Joliet, we would then look at moving the plant east far enough so that they're receiving treated water. It wouldn't make sense to bring the water all the way here, treat it, and then have to pipe it back 10 miles the other direction. But that will depend a little bit on the discussions.
So in some of the other discussions, it's been my understanding that treating well water, river water, lake water is all different. Not getting into a Flint, Michigan issue with lead. I mean, a couple articles lately in the Chicago papers about the city of Chicago and how much lead they have. We have lead that we have started, been going ongoing process to get rid of. I can assume some of these other communities that we're speaking of have some age like ours. Is the treatment a different issue when we still have the lead pipes versus?
That's a great question, because that is obviously a huge concern, is we don't want to go through this process, switch water sources and create a different problem. So actually we're attacking this on two fronts. There's actually a whole, we have a sub-consultant on our team on this project who has a dedicated scope item to develop what's called a water source transfer plan. And so that team has been working with Allison and Nick Gornick to obtain some pipe from Joliet to look at the water quality, understand the current water quality, and they're developing a strategy around what would need to be done to make sure that as we transition to a different water, that the system would remain stable and that we would not leach lead out of the services into the water. That team is then coordinating directly with the team that worked on the water treatment plant study to say, let's make sure that the water we're treating in a way that makes it easy to maintain that stability. So we recognize that that's a critical component, and that will be a critical part of the process from now until the day that we turn the tap on.
I assume we can't assume that we're going to get rid of all the lead service before.
Yeah, I can comment on that. I mean, we are taking a very aggressive approach to replacing the lead service lines. As we've been bringing to the council this past summer, we have been securing these loans from the IEPA with 100% principal forgiveness. So currently, we have the $1 million loan that was already approved for fiscal year 2020, and we're in the process of securing a $4 million loan with principal forgiveness for fiscal year 2021. So, with that, we're going to over the next 10 years, aggressively attack replacing the lead service lines for Joliet residents.
I know we approved a couple of large bids just recently.
Yes. So, and if anyone wants more information, any residents want more information on our lead service line replacement program, there's a lot of information on the website, or they could call the utilities number at 815-724-4220, and we'll do testing for residents who have concerns with lead service lines. Okay, there. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to tag on to what Councilman Mudgett said. He pretty much asked my question and answered. But I think when our focus is on quality of our water and looking at this advanced approach to it, it seems like that would be something that we should be really, really focused in, because at the end of the day, what we want is quality water. And when we switch water sources, we can run into a whole lot of other problems. Mm-hmm. But yes, I just wanted to say that.
Okay.
Do you have like a roadmap of the homes, or do you just go by the age and the area? that would have the lead service lines still?
So when we started, so we're required by the state to prepare an inventory of all of our lead service, of all of our service lines in the city. So in Joliet, the use of lead for service lines was banned in the late 30s. So we're in a better position than, for example, Chicago, that didn't ban the use of lead service lines until the 80s. So what we did to begin preparing this inventory is we looked at home age. And so then we focused in on those homes that were constructed before 1940. We've identified those on a map, and that was about 17,000 homes that were constructed prior to 1940. So then through our water main replacement program, through the lead service lines we have replaced, we've been narrowing in on what's remaining. And so we've been doing that through an inventory, which we started last year, where we actually go out, make appointments with our city plumbers. They go into the home and actually do a visual inspection of the service line. So we do know that in some cases, when these homes were constructed, like similar to new construction, the builder would come in and put in a portion of the service line to the shutoff valve, and then the home gets built and they would construct the other portion. So we are identifying that some of these are, we're not able to identify in the home. So we have initiated a potholing program where we're actually going to go out to the, out into the parkway, hydro excavate on either side of the Buffalo box and then identify the service line material that way, because the goal is to completely replace the service line. So we've been developing that inventory. We're very close to having that inventory interactive added to our website. Right now we have a static map showing the lead service line locations, but we're very close to adding to the website where a resident could type in an address and it would then pop up what the service line material is. So.
Allison, don't we currently use a chemical that's supposed to, encapsulate or
That's
stabilize the lead?
Yes, and I can, Teresa's been working closely with the folks on the corrosion control team, and I'm not sure if there's been any recommendations or that evaluation will be part of it. We currently do add a chemical, so.
Yeah, so the team we have has a national corrosion expert on it, and they're going through a two-part evaluation right now. The first was looking at the existing water quality to determine how corrosive it is, and then the next step is to look at it as compared to the proposed treatment and determine. So at this point, exactly what that corrosion inhibitor would be used, whether it would be maintained as current or recommend something different, will be determined in the next couple months here as they take the proposed treatment that is being presented and compare it to the existing water quality.
And how would the lead concern and the mitigation of lead that we choose up front as we design this, how will that affect adding on future customers or commission members? Because they may well have maybe more lead than maybe they didn't. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in our discussions with potential regional partners, there's certain things that each of them is going to have to do on their own. And one of them is develop a water source transfer plan. We actually had a meeting with IEPA, last week, and they reiterated that is going to have to be done because each of our communities has a different water chemistry currently, even though we're all getting our water from the deep aquifer, based on what chemicals have been added, there's, different water chemistry. So that's one of the items that each community that would be, switching water sources would have to do. In addition, they would also have to get their own Lake Michigan allocation.
And so that water transfer plant is almost like isolating each community from the main.
Yes, because once the water, from the commission's infrastructure would go into that community, then it would be, each of the, kind of the, each community currently has different water chemistry. So then when that comes into their community, it will affect their pipes differently. So, one thing I think that we've mentioned is, currently, we have this chemical that's added. So, customers who do have lead service lines have this protective barrier in place. So just because you have a lead service line currently doesn't mean that you are seeing elevated lead levels, and we have not seen that in any of the sampling that we've done. However, the issue is when you switch water sources and that chemistry changes, then that can impact that liner that's been built up on that pipe, and then, result in the lead leaching into the water.
And I'm presuming the DuPage Water Commission and the City of Chicago's water treatment, if you will, water supply, has already tackled these types of issues.
Yes, and really this is something, and I don't know when the DuPage Water Commission switched if this was an issue, but really ever since Flint happened, it's, definitely the awareness of the issues associated with transferring water sources has, gained a much higher profile, which has necessitated then these steps that we're taking.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, just move on to the next part then of just, again, going around the room and obtaining any comments that you have regarding the recommendation that we would proceed with an advanced treatment plant for the Indiana intake option. And Councilman Hug, we can start with you.
Have we started trying to define our market area, how far east, how far south, how far west we will go?
As far as customers
or commission members?
Yes, so when I was making the presentation, we had an exhibit showing that we had started to explore the area between the state line and Joliet. And what we found is that the majority of those communities already have long-term contracts in place to purchase Lake Michigan water, either from Chicago or from Chicago Heights, which purchases water from Hammond. So for that reason, and also the technical reasons that Joe mentioned regarding, being more beneficial to have the treatment plant located closer to Joliet, we're not recommending that we include, partners that are outside of the western Will County area. Okay. Mayor Odehirk?
No, I don't have any comments on this.
Okay. Councilman Coleman?
Nope, sounds like a plan.
All right. Councilman Turk?
Yeah, I think when you look at the slides showing the three cost plans, it is, I think it more than justifies it's not a big difference in the advanced plan, and it can be easily justified that it's the best for it, for the customers.
Thank you. Councilman Mudron?
I'll answer.
Okay. Councilman Morris? Councilman Mudron? Councilman
I
Gabbard?
think that the Joliet location plan and looking at the cost of it, of the advanced water treatment plant would be good.
Okay, and then Councilman Dickinson?
The community farthest east that has any interest is New Lenox.
So New Lenox has a contract with Tinley Park to purchase water from Oak Lawn through 2054. So we have been discussing the furthest east community would be Frankfurt. And so they have expressed interest, especially given that the transmission main routing that Teresa will be discussing in a moment, runs through their community as currently proposed. Okay, thank you, and move on to the next agenda item, which is a presentation on the level 1 transmission main routing evaluation.
Good evening. My name is Teresa O'Grady. I'm with Crawford, Murphy & Tilley, and I'm going to be talking to you about the level 1 transmission main routing evaluation. So when we say transmission main, what we're talking about is that large diameter water main that goes from the source to Joliet. And so in both of the alternatives, that length of transmission main is significant, ranging from 30 miles to 47 miles, and ranging in diameter from 48-inch for the Joliet only scenario to 66-inch, which is the Joliet plus some of those regional communities. And as we've stated in previous presentations, a majority of that transmission main is outside the city limits. So it makes routing a little bit more difficult. So the starting point of each of the transmission mains is a source, whether that's Chicago or Indiana, and the ending point is the Joliet receiving station, which we've assumed to be the Fairmount and Garvin pumping station. So with this routing, we can't go in a straight line. It would be really convenient and cost effective if we could just go straight from the source to Joliet, but we can't do that. We have to follow existing right-of-ways and corridors. And so those right-of-ways could be IDOT right-of-ways, could be tollway, local roads, could be corridors for utilities, or forest preserve, or bike trails. So there's a lot of options, and so what we wanted to do is take an overall look in 2020 at those options in order to refine and optimize that route in order to get better cost estimates for the alternatives. So as part of the 2020 transmission main evaluation, the project team focused their efforts on these tasks. And so first was collection of route and corridor information, such as land ownership, permitting entities, and also bedrock depth that we looked at. That information was then developed into a GIS database to aid in the evaluations. So the first one is the level 1 routing study, which is what I'm talking to you today about. And of course, today is the presentation of the level 1 routing study recommendations. From here, we'll go into the level 2 routing study and then incorporate that into the basis of design report that will be presented to the council in November. So as we look at the transmission main routing in 2020, we start with the level 1 analysis. And as you remember, in our phase 1 study, we identified some routes or a route from the source to Joliet. And what we wanted to do is take a bigger, higher level overview and look at the entire region from that source to Joliet and determine if there's any additional potential routes. And so we wanted to determine that and then look at a high level evaluation based on information obtained through discussions with permitting agencies along the route. And then evaluate that quantitatively to say, what are the factors that will impact that routing? Looking at cost, complexity, and different risk ratings to evaluate the routes between each other, so that we can identify a route in order to move into the level 2 analysis. And the level 2 analysis takes a deeper dive along that route in that corridor. And when we're talking about a route, it's a line, a route, a path. And that corridor, we're looking at potential roadways and routes within about a mile either side of that route. To see if there's other roads we can go on that might be easier, less impact, less congested. And so in the level 2 study, we use the level 1 criteria, but we also look at some more impacts or factors, including major utilities, any kind of environmental concerns, any contaminated soils, traffic counts, and railroad crossings, with the goal being at the end of 2020 to have this refined, optimized, and cost-effective route that then can be moved into the preliminary design in 2021. So the level 1 transmission main analysis consists of first gathering that typical permitting data from the agencies along the potential routes, identifying additional potential routes for consideration, and then developing evaluation criteria and evaluating those routes using the evaluation criteria. So once the project team gathered the typical permitting data from the agencies along the route, we then met to look at the overall view. And we looked at the source and then Joliet. And we based on our experience too, we looked at some routes that might not be feasible. And we pulled those out of the consideration and then developed additional potential routes. And this is an exhibit that was in the memo that shows kind of those criteria that we used as areas to avoid, and then the routes that we came up with. So there were 5 Chicago routes that were identified and 4 Indiana routes that were identified. Once we identified those routes, we identified the evaluation criteria that would be used in the level 1 assessment. And those included cost, length, risk, and that was mainly risk to construction, bedrock depth, number of private parcels, ownership type, flexibility for alternative routes if difficulty was found along the route, number of permitting agencies, and then the opportunity for added water population. As we're looking at the alternatives, there's some that have communities that if the water main went through their community, they might want to join in on a commission, whereas if it doesn't go through their community, they might not want to join in on the alternative. So I want to take a moment just to walk through the routes and then show the scoring for each of the different alternatives. So we have right now the level 1 routes for the Lake Michigan Chicago Department of Water alternative routing here. And so Route 1 was primarily ComEd and local roads. And so if I can get the pointer to work. Not sure if it's going to show. There it is. Okay. So we have the Route 1 that follows along and then continues down this path. We have the Route 2 that then comes along and goes down this way. It's a slight variation of the Route 1. We have Route 3, and that's primarily IDOT roadway there. And Route 4 is also primarily IDOT roadway. And then we have Route 5 that is a variation that runs down this way. That's a combination of local roads, forest preserve, and IDOT roads. Route 1 I didn't mention, it was ComEd roads and local roads, and Route 2 was primarily ComEd, forest preserve, and local roads. So based on the analysis of the criteria, we came up with the scoring that's shown here. And again, the memo goes into a lot more detail, but just wanted to share the results of that scoring. So based on the scoring, the Route 2 rated the highest at a 7 here, and that was the ComEd, forest preserve, and local roads, with the Route 2 as a variation of with Route 1 as a variation of Route 2 coming in a close second. So the third was the IDOT roads, the 60% IDOT road, Route 3. It had the shortest route, but there was complexities due to limited IDOT right-of-way, inflexibility for alternate routes and sections, and having to have the deeper water main in the IDOT pavement. And one of the things we did meet with IDOT, and one of the things they did say about this route is it's an arterial, so they would allow it, but only if it was shown to be the most feasible route. And there were no other feasible routes available. So as we move into the level 1 routes for Lake Michigan Water New Indiana intake alternative, we ended up with 4 routes that we evaluated, and I'll run through those quickly here. So first of all, we had Route 1 that runs through, and it's primarily ComEd corridor. We had Route 2 running through here, that's interstate IDOT roadway. We have Route 3 that comes down along the bottom of the page there, which is primarily local roads. And then we had Route 4 here, that's a bike trail. And so looking at the scoring of those, we ended up with the one being rated the best was the Route 1, the ComEd corridor. We're not showing a score for the Route 2, primarily because in conversations with IDOT, they said that they wouldn't allow construction along the interstate IDOT roadway. Just prior to removing that score, it was rated the lowest among all of them. So just even without considering what IDOT said, it still wouldn't have been preferred there. Rated the second was the Route 3 local roads. Although it was a longer length, it was easier construction because it was in more of a rural area. And then close second there was the Route 4, which was the bike path corridor. So based on the level 1 evaluation and scoring, we're recommending that these routes be advanced into the level 2 analysis. So for the Lake Michigan Water, Chicago Department of Water Management alternative, we are recommending evaluating Route 2, which was the ComEd Forest Preserve and local roads. We do recognize that we need to talk to Cook County Forest Preserve and make sure that it is feasible along this route. And that would be done as part of the level 2 assessment. And if not, that Route 1 is a variation on Route 2, and we can move to Route 1 if Cook County Forest Preserve indicates that route along the Forest Preserve would be difficult. So the Lake Michigan Water New Indiana intake alternative, we're recommending evaluating Route 1, which is primarily the ComEd corridor. But if you recall in the previous map, the Route 4 was pretty close, and it is within that mile of Route 1, and so it would be in the corridor. So we're recommending we still continue and look at the Route 4 during level 2 as part of the corridor of Route 1. So hopefully I didn't confuse things there, but this is the recommended level 2 route and corridor map. So that blue line is the Chicago Department of Water Management recommended route, and the shaded blue area is the corridor that would be evaluated. And then the red line is the new Indiana intake alternative route, and the red shading is the corridor that's recommended to be advanced into level 2. So next steps. So in the next couple months, we will complete the level 2 transmission main analysis and determine the optimized, refined, cost-effective route to then include in the basis of design report that would then be presented to the council. And then the council will vote in December on the selected water source alternative. And that would then proceed based on the selected alternative, proceed with that route into the 2021 routing study that then gets into an even deeper analysis of the route, looking at congestion along the roadway, looking at existing utilities, and surveying and other data impacts in order to develop a preliminary alignment by the end of 2021 that then can be moved into final design into 2022.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. And I think from that presentation, you can see, as we were talking earlier, the benefits of the commission approach that was discussed with the amount of infrastructure that's going to be constructed outside of Joliet. So at this point, I'll just open it up again to questions in general from the council regarding this recommendation.
When you're talking about local roads or ComEd issues, are those potential eminent domain problems, or is there some type of public policy or law about a public utility with a ComEd easement?
From my understanding, it would be with ComEd, you would be securing a license agreement, but I will turn it over to Barb, or Barb can answer that question.
Generally, with private property owners, it's either a license agreement or an easement agreement. So a right-of-way through Commonwealth Edison property would include something like that. If you are a commission, the commission has a unique authority. Commissions and public water districts have the same authority to use public grounds and public highways of the state and local government for the purpose of putting through their lines. So there's some benefit to looking at public roads where where they're not too congested.
We ran into a significant issue with the Hopewell Road Bridge with the railroads. And I know you identified you're trying to figure out how many railroad lines you have to cross. Do you anticipate, because that held up that project for over a year, those types of difficulties if we had to go underneath a railroad crossing or railroad track?
Yes, I mean, we definitely understand that working with the railroads, we don't anticipate that there would be a roadblock where we wouldn't obtain the ability to do the crossing, but it does take time, which is why we, have that schedule for design over that 3-year period. I can, turn over to Teresa for any additional comments on that time frame.
Yeah, and one of the things we're gonna do as part of the level 2 assessment is talk to those permitting entities. A lot of times you can find a crossing that will work. But yes, with the railroad, it takes time and a lot of communication, and that would start here in the next month.
Thank you.
Got a question. So is this a time I could ask a construction question?
Sure.
What depth ideally do you want this pipe?
I think currently we're planning for a minimum of 5-foot depth to the top of the pipe. And so as Teresa had mentioned, we had looked at some, IDOT crossings and that it might have to be deeper to coordinate with any existing infrastructure that might be there.
And I assume we would need a few pumping stations for this
Yes.
lake?
So Teresa has evaluated that also. I can comment.
Yeah, so for both alternatives, the Chicago Department of Water Management alternative and the new Indiana intake alternative, between the source and the Fairmount Garvin pumping station, there would be one intermediate pumping station. We've figured it out based on the elevations and the pressure. We looked at between 35 and 100 PSI pressure on that line. And it would require one intermediate pump station for each of the routes and for each of the alternatives.
And I assume because of the size of this pipe, this would be an open ditch versus a directional boring?
So as part of this evaluation, we identified where the water main had to be constructed trenchless. So basically where it could not be open cut. And we've identified that in this, within the corridor types and looked at that in these major crossings.
Thank you.
And those costs then are being incorporated into the updated cost estimates. But there was that level of detail included in the cost estimates prepared for the phase 2 study. So, are there any other questions?
Allison, I just have one. When you're considering the routes, are potential partners or customers really is a non-factor? I mean, where those routes go, or is it?
Yeah, so one of the criteria we had looked at was, as Teresa had mentioned, if a route ran through a community that was, considered to be a regional partner, it was given a rating, based on that because that would encourage that level of participation. So, that was a factor that was considered and, definitely as we move forward with this, it's something that will be continuing to be evaluated. Okay. Right, from here, I'll just move into then comments regarding this recommendation, which we'll be moving forward with then into the level 2 analysis, those 2 routes that Teresa had presented. Mayor Oderkirk.
Well, I think the transparency is great. I'm glad we're having these meetings. Again, at the council level too, I couldn't give a comment one way or the other on a specific route. I don't know. But I see nothing wrong with what you've done, if that's...
Yes, we're just looking for concurrence,
Okay.
so.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Quillen?
Well, with anything, you have to weigh the pros and cons and take the path of least resistance. And I believe we're doing that, so.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Turk?
Everything I've seen so far is very good work.
Okay. Councilman Morgan? Nope.
Good job.
Councilman Morris?
Yeah, I don't know, this might be more of a question, which I probably should have asked during the question period. So the 2 routes, I know you had mentioned earlier, I think Don had asked about the first east customer, Frankfurt. So with the Lake Michigan, I guess it's both Lake Michigan, but Chicago, would that benefit Frankfurt or would that be more of a expense on them? Because I know that's further from the Indiana.
Yeah, so when Pete and I met with them, that was something we discussed with them where, we asked that question to all of the potential regional partners, do you prefer one alternative over the other? And definitely in Frankfurt's case, there's a benefit for the Indiana alternative because the pipe would be coming through their community. So they didn't say they wouldn't be interested at all if we selected the Chicago alternative, but then, that would make that alternative, more costly for them because the pipe would then have to be extended further east to serve them.
But not to the point that they would not.
Yeah, Pete, I'll defer to you if you recall that conversation. I believe they said that it wasn't a non-starter, but I think the preference was for Indiana.
Most of the communities really didn't have a distinct preference. In other words, I think they would take either Lake Michigan from Indiana or Chicago. Price is probably the bigger consideration in terms of what they were interested in. In Frankfurt's case, it just was apparent that Indiana would be more cost effective for them, so they did express that as a priority or an interest. So that was one of the ones that we did record that way.
Councilwoman Reardon?
I think you're doing a great job. It's all starting to come into focus. It's nice to see it,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Gavin?
Absolutely, I think you're doing a tremendous job in all the work that you all have put into this. But the good work, we'll eventually figure this thing out. It is becoming clearer now. So.
Thank you. Councilman Dickinson? Okay, and Councilman Hug.
Just a couple of a question or two before I make my comment. So, if on the Indiana route, if as we determine, let's say Frankfurt wants to be on the commission or being or a customer, either one, what we're looking at here, we can take the plant right now. The termination will be at preliminarily at a plant on the east side of Joliet, but it could be on the east side of Frankfurt.
Yes, I Joe, I don't know if you have any more siting information. I know we had, in the phase 2 study, looked at some sort of locations in Joliet, but I think as far as Frankfurt, that would be kind of the next step, part of the evaluation.
Right, we're currently looking at potential sites that would be feasible there based on how much land we would need, and that's really part of the phase 2 analysis. I think as Teresa said, now that we've got some direction on the corridors, we can go back and start to have some more meaningful discussions with these communities. And what we're really looking for early in the process is win-win scenarios. Is there a parcel where they're doing some redevelopment where there would be a good opportunity to partner up on something? Or is there a street corridor that they're looking to reconstruct that could be done in conjunction with water main construction? So there's no specific sites yet, but those discussions will be ongoing this fall.
And since I'm not a geologist and I don't own a slide rule, and if you gave me your slide rule, I wouldn't know how to use it, I'll probably defer the route to the engineers. I'm sure you guys have done a great job on it.
I put my slide rule in the closet too, so.
I've never used one.
Okay, well, I really appreciate, everyone's participation tonight. I think we definitely, as a project team, have the direction now to move forward with the study. We're looking forward to, finalizing that evaluation and presenting that to you in November. So kind of the next steps are, we'll be having a stakeholder meeting, again, to update the public in September, and then we'll be coming back for the third city council workshop in November. So, Anne, do you want to turn to the next, I think, agenda item, which is public comment?
Public comments, not on agenda items. There was no one that had signed up ahead of time. Do we have anyone that is here that would like to speak? Next up. This is to adjourn.
We need a motion to adjourn.
You do need a motion. Again, thank you, everyone. I know you guys are putting in a lot of work on this. And Allison, you've shepherded this for 3 years now. So thank you. It's good work.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Need a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
There you go.
Poor
Way to take
Ann.
control.
For 5 years again.